Let's start off with the headlines then, shall we? I'm apparently 52 years old. My name is Carrie Fisher. I tend to forget that one from time to time. I live in a really nice house in Los Angeles. I have 2 dogs. And I have a beautiful daughter named Billy. Now, before we begin, I just have to start out by saying that my entire life could be summed up with, if it were not funny, then it would just be true. And that is simply unacceptable. What that means, other than what it sounds like, is that sometimes things happen in your life. And from a certain slant, it may seem as tragic or shocking even. However, over time, the funny slant comes in, making the same thing that harmed you do so no longer. A good example of the tragic yet shocking may be, a few years ago, a good friend of mine died in my home. But not simply content enough to have died in my house, the bastard died in my bed too. So he didn't just die in his sleep, he died in mine as well. Alison M. Landoni's in A Laughing Matter, Transforming Trauma Therapeutically Using Expressive Arts Therapy provides that humor can be used as a communication tool within the therapeutic process, as well as, by using humor therapeutically, it allows coping mechanisms to offset life's many stressors, as well as teaching the importance of self-efficiency and self-control. In her 5th published work, turned into a stage adaptation, author, actress, and comedian Carrie Fisher provides the hardships in her life. Even though she instructs the audience to not pity her or her experiences, it can be difficult not to label her life as a problematic one. However, she offers a different perspective. A good life, with a few hiccups along the way, and dealing with these hiccups with the best medicine, laughter. Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher. Greg was my best friend, so we weren't dating or anything, meaning he didn't die in the saddle, making me the saddle. No. Greg was gay, which turns out may be something of a reoccurring theme here. But if you entertain, as do I would recommend not doing this for 2 reasons. 1, they'll end up dead, and I don't care how religious you are, that can't be much fun for anybody. And B, it tends to throw the hosts off her game for about a year. Or 3. But enough about death, I just wanted to get that bummer story out of the way, because the rest of mine are all sunshine and smiles and skipping. Alright, you got me. I'm a drug addict. No, I'm not asking that you view my life as a predicament of sorts. I'm simply describing the dynamics that were at play during my formative years. You know, one of my dozens of psychiatrists told me it's important to distinguish the difference between a problem and an inconvenience. But I don't care what the dictionary has to say. A problem derails your life, and an inconvenience is not having a nice spot on the underailed train. Given that, I have had 3 problems in my life. Dead guy in my bed, substance abuse, and manic depression. But my final little problemette seems to stem from the trouble I seem to have with seemingly romantic relationships. Specifically, the last categorically serious relationship I had with my ex-husband, Brian. Yeah. My ex-husband left me for a man. Brian left me for Scott, making Scott the man who got away. I'm not gonna lie, that's actually really funny. But the thing that really ticked me off is that, having nothing to do with Brian, about a year after, I was invited to go to a mental institution. And You don't want to be rude, so you go. How many of you have been invited to a mental hospital? That's what I thought. But it turned out to be something of an eye-opener for me, and ultimately, I'm very sane in how crazy I am. I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, so you could say that I swing both ways. You would have to say that very loudly, though, otherwise I wouldn't be able to hear you. Although I have a lot of it under control nowadays, every once in a while I do tend to explode. So in the off chance that I do, when I have company over because I am a great hostess, minus the Greg thing, but we're not talking about that right now, I provide bibs for all of my guests, so I don't get my crazy juices all over their nice clothing. But now, we've gotten to know each other a little while, so I think it's finally time I talk about ECT. And when I come to think of it nowadays, it really helps me to learn that I am not alone, and that there are other people out there like me, and they are also fucked up. And I mean, look how much these fellow fuck-ups have managed to accomplish. I mean, come on now, people. But typically the question I get is, why did you undergo it? To tell you the truth, I was not really appealed to the idea of electric shock therapy, but it had been recommended over the years by dozens of my psychiatrists. I always deemed it too barbaric, though. I mean, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is not the most enticing example. But I've been feeling pretty overwhelmed and honestly defeated. I didn't necessarily feel like dying, but I didn't really feel a whole lot like living either. My other reason was that I was just depressed. Profoundly depressed. And a part of that could be attributed to my mood disorder, which was no doubt probably the source of my emotional intensity. Now that is what takes sadness and goes into sadness squared. It's what revs the motor of misery, guns the engine of an unpleasant experience, filling it with rocket fuel and blasting off into a place in the stratosphere that is, something like a suicidal tendency. So I think to myself, after this, after the rehabs and the gay husband and the nightclubs, if what doesn't kill you makes you... Well, if what doesn't kill you makes you not dead. But if what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, then I should be lifting the Cedars-Sinai Hospital on my shoulders and glowing in the dark at this point. So I think to myself, Carrie, bring it on! Don't ever say that. Do not ever say bring it on, because spoiler alert, it will be brought. And that, my friends, is when Greg died. But ECT has forced me to rediscover the sum of what makes Carrie Fisher, Carrie Fisher. And I find out a hell of a lot of it fills me with a sort of giddy gratitude. Some of my memories will never return. They are lost along with the fleeting sense of hopelessness and despair. Not a tremendous price to pay if you ask me. Totally worth it! But a few months after Greg died, my friend Dave said, "Honey, I know this is a pain in your ass." And I said to Dave, if I could isolate the pain to just my ass, that would be awesome. But he also told me that the only way to find heaven is by backing out of the gates of hell. And while this place is not necessarily everybody's heaven, sometimes if I'm quiet enough, I can hear the angels sing. That or I fucked up my medication, but who's to say?